Welcome back, everyone, to another reaction video. Well, if you've ever played a game like EU4, Europa Universalis 4, then you might realize that the countries as they exist today in Europe are not the countries that always existed. The borders are different. Sometimes there are countries that exist today that didn't exist then. Heck, there are countries in the world that didn't exist 40 years ago. Or that did exist and don't exist anymore. So the country map has always been changing in Europe, and so I thought this might be an interesting video to take a look at today. This is from the channel General Knowledge. It's been a little while since we've looked at one of theirs. And the title of the video is Countries That Used to Exist in Medieval Europe. The link is in the description, so you can check it out without my commentary, see all of General Knowledge's other content. Let's go ahead and dive into this one.
In videos, I use this amazing and detailed map made by Radka Tavobratka on Reddit. Sorry if I mispronounced that.
That actually is a really cool map. It's even got all the coats of arms in there and everything. Kind of feel like I want that one myself. Love it.
Be using this map a lot through this video, so all credit to them for making it. In it, they depict what Europe looked like in the year 1444.
And look at the mess of the Holy Roman Empire, of what is today Germany. I mean, no wonder when that all finally got solidified into one country in the middle of the 19th century, it posed problems for the rest of the world.
At this point, Europe was leaving the period usually known as the Middle Ages, which had lasted for around 1,000 years since 476 AD with the fall of the Roman Empire. Since then, the landscape of Europe changed drastically, and this is how it looked by 1444. So I thought it would be interesting to go through the map, finding out the main differences between Europe then and now, namely in one specific thing, which countries existed back then that don't anymore.
So I don't know if you'll touch on this, but it's important to note that our modern concept of a nation didn't really exist in the same way at that time. Because it was a feudal system in most places, you're much more dealing with a system of nobility and people under them. So you have a hierarchy. You might have a king, you might have an emperor, you might have a duke or a prince, or count, and they're all within this hierarchy that one answers to another, and so it's much more about allegiance to a person or to a family than it is to a geographic area.
Countries are a bit of a modern concept. The idea
I should have literally just waited a couple seconds. And it's funny that I know we talk all the time about this happens, but in a video the other day, I had a thing where I kind of implied that Martin Scorsese had directed The Godfather, and it wasn't really what I intended to say, and I clarified myself about 30 seconds later. But in that 30 seconds, before I clarified it, there must have been 30 people who commented and said, no, Scorsese didn't direct that, it was Coppola. And then all I could think was, just wait. And a lot of times, by the time I went into comment and replied to their comment, they had already deleted it. So I do the same thing. I say something, whereas if I had just waited a couple of seconds.
Of a nation-state emerged at its earliest in the 17th century only. At this point there was a feudal system, with counts, dukes, kings, and emperors, each ruling small to large portions of land and paying vassalage or having as vassals others who did the same.
So I want to point one thing out here. You see how it has the Pope and the church up at the top. Obviously, that's not true for everybody, especially like the Ottomans obviously are not answering to the Pope, and other countries like that. But that idea of the Pope with a great deal of political power in addition to his religious influence really starts to develop in a significant way around the time of the formation of the Holy Roman Empire. And we've done videos about this where you kind of have the Church and the Holy Roman Empire kind of mutually, what's the word I want to say here, legitimizing one another's authority. And so by having the Pope kind of almost grant the authority of an emperor, like the Holy Roman Emperor, that is, in effect, making that emperor then subservient to the church. And it wasn't always that way.
of land and paying vassalage or having as vassals others who did the same. But even if it is this absence of countries that we notice, let's find out where. I'll provide a brief description of each old country we run into. If you want, I can make more dedicated videos for each of them.
Yeah, we don't talk about, when we talk about the year 1500, we're not talking about the domain of Henry Tudor. We're talking about England. So even though the concept of a modern nation doesn't really exist at this time, we still refer to those nations.
We can begin west to east because I'm Portuguese and I'm biased wanting to start with my own country. Portugal is a remarkable example. As early as this, its modern European borders were established. In fact, they arguably date back even earlier to 1297. However, an important difference must be pointed out: Algarve. Despite being ruled by the Portuguese king, Algarve was technically a dominion of the crown and a kingdom in name, if you will, a country in itself.
So we still have this idea of dominions into the 20th century, right? Canada begins the 20th century as a dominion of the British Crown. It's not, in the strictest sense, an independent nation. We largely think of it that way now, even though King Charles is still the head of state of Canada and of Australia and New Zealand and a lot of other places. But we think of them as independent now. But early 1900s, these dominions really were still just dominions.
With this idealized flag depicting both the Christian ruler and the former Muslim one.
Interesting.
This could technically be a medieval country that no longer exists, but not really. Spain was at this time not yet unified. Only Leon and Castile had come together, but two significant other countries or kingdoms still existed in the peninsula: Aragon, comprising what is today the east coast of Spain, and Granada in the south.
So if you grew up in the U.S., you probably learned a lot about Ferdinand and Isabella, who are the ones who kind of sponsored Christopher Columbus in his attempt to get east by sailing west. And they are the ones who are going to bring Aragon and Castile together. And the modern Spain is then going to form as we get into the 1500s.
Granada was still under the control of the Moors and was, I believe, the last Muslim stronghold to fall in the Iberian Peninsula. It was known as the Emirates of Granada, a breakaway state from the Almohad Caliphate that once ruled much of Spain, with sovereign Granada existing from 1230 to 1492. It had the Sierra Nevada mountains as a natural barrier that kept it
That's awesome, because we have Sierra Nevada mountains in California.
safe for long. It was integrated into Mediterranean trade networks and heavily financed by Genoese bankers who wanted to gain control of the gold trade carried in through the Sahara Desert.
We've talked about this in other videos as well, about how we can look at history through different lenses, and one of the most important lenses to look through in order to understand history, particularly at this time period, is trade. Trade routes are everything. The whole reason that you have this big push for exploration into what we call the New World, North and South America, is because of the strengthening Ottoman Empire, the fall of Constantinople in 1453, and the subsequent closing off of, or at least restricting, the trade routes to the east by land and through the Mediterranean in that direction, heavy taxes, and just these Western European powers are looking for a way around that. They first try to go around, Portugal goes around Africa, and they establish some colonies along the west coast of Africa, but they're looking for another way.
They were also known for their beautiful architecture, some of which remains up to today in southern Spain. The destruction is connected with the Spanish Reconquista, which took place just after the destruction of this other country, Aragon. Although destruction is a little far-fetched. Aragon was a Christian kingdom.
Yeah, not really destruction, as more as being kind of absorbed.
Spain, existing from 1035 and unifying with Leon Castile in 1469. Although
there you go, Isabella and Ferdinand, the ones you learn about in the Christopher Columbus story,
technically remaining in existence within Spain up to the 18th century. However,
and I believe their daughter is Catherine of Aragon, who is the first wife of Henry VIII.
This was their period of full sovereignty, flying as their flag the colors now associated with the region of Catalonia. Their ruler, through the crown of Aragon, also controlled Catalonia itself and Valencia, as well as Mallorca, I think. Their loss of sovereignty came with the union with Castile and the unification of Spain. As we move further north, the mess starts. France looks more broken apart than it effectively was. A lot of the territory was already under the rule of the French crown, or somewhat connected to it. This more simplified map by another Reddit user, Willem Dill, makes it clearer.
Yeah, so when we're talking about, for example, English history, and you talk about the time of the dynasty that we know today as the Plantagenets, which really they knew themselves as the it's one of those days. Had to stop and think for a minute. The Angevin dynasty, because they come from Anjou, and at their extent they control large portions of France, including you have this area down here, which all for a while goes to the English king, but is not part of England. It's still part of France. And so as we talk about that whole idea of allegiances to a feudal lord, the King of England is lord over England, and he because of his personal rulership of places like Calais and other parts of France, they're not considered part of England. They're still considered part of France, and the King of England had to pay homage to the King of France for those lands as his feudal vassal for those lands.
I believe a lot of these middle regions were sovereign, but to some extent connected to the French crown. But correct me in the comments if I'm wrong. The control of coastal regions in the north and west by England is also noteworthy, but those weren't their own countries. I want to focus on two sovereign states, Brittany and Burgundy. Brittany was not a kingdom at this point, only a duchy, but it was still a sovereign one. It's odd how, at this time, different types of countries could exist at different levels or different rankings, if you will. A kingdom could be independent pretty much in the same way that a duchy was. It's kind of hard to think that they're different, but also at the same level.
And it's also true for the hierarchy underneath them. So think of Austro-Hungary. You have an emperor. So technically you could have kings under him, but sometimes the emperor was also the king. So, for example, Franz Joseph, the emperor of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, is also, for example, the king of Hungary. And so then under him, you don't have a crown prince, you have an archduke who is his heir.
Brittany had this really cool flag, black and white, and their existence is connected to the expulsion of the Viking armies from the region, but its control was always disputed, from the English to high influence of local monastic orders and internal struggles for power. Eventually, the King of France acquired the title of the duchy through marriage, and it was effectively annexed into France.
So basically, if you want to understand all this, just play Crusader Kings. Because that's exactly how all this goes. It gives you a real insight into the marriages and how you can inherit titles and suddenly find yourself the ruler of a land you've never set foot in, like King George I of England, who, born and raised in what is now Germany and what was then Hanover, which wasn't a kingdom yet, but eventually becomes a kingdom, and it's all a mess. But because of some of these smaller territories that aren't really powerful on their own, they're very often allying themselves with other powers. And so England and Brittany or Burgundy, and France and Brittany or Burgundy are often kind of allying with each other. Same with Spain. They're always looking. It's no different than what you have in the early 1900s in what develops into World War I, is that you have people always looking for a balance of power by allying themselves with others to form a stronger bloc.
And next, I believe one of the most interesting examples from this video, Burgundy. Burgundy was a name given to many states in Europe throughout history. This particular one is the Duchy of Burgundy, which existed from 918 to 1482, emerging precisely as a successor to an older kingdom of the Burgundians, which in turn came from the Burgundian people, an East Germanic tribe.
So again, you can go back to the late Roman Empire and really see how some of these modern countries start to develop their identity. The Alemannia is the French word for Germany. The Franks, of course, there's France. You got the Saxons up here. You've got the Thuringians. the realm of Sigurus. You got the Britons right there, the Burgundians, the Visigoths. You also had the Belgae for a while there early on, before Julius Caesar conquered them, and that's where you get Belgium from.
So they were pretty much descendants of a people of their own. They held, at this time, separated lands throughout what is now France and the Low Countries. The Burgundian state was one of the largest ducal territories that existed at the time of the emergence of early modern Europe. At one point, Duke Charles the Bold, their last duke, went to war with the Swiss Confederacy and was killed in the 1477 Battle of Nancy. The extinction of his dynasty led to the absorption of the duchy into the French crown by King Louis XI.
So much of this is all about absorbing territory, and that's why you look at the map now, you don't see all these crazy lines and tiny places for the most part. I mean, there's a few, right? Places like Morocco, or not Morocco, Monaco, Liechtenstein, but for the most part, big countries that absorbed all these places.
Possessions in the Low Countries passed on to Habsburg descendants. I believe this is the perfect example of a full-on country that existed in medieval Europe, holding a vast amount of land. It's odd to think that they very well could have maintained their sovereignty if that king hadn't died in battle, and today we could have this country here bordering France, Germany, Switzerland, and Italy. It would be very strange. As we go through this map, we come to realize one thing. Most of Europe's modern countries were not unified as they are today.
Right.
In fact, it's quite rare to see. France was fragmented, but reasonably whole. England and Scotland were pretty much at their current territory, same as Norway and Sweden. And
that's why you see that some of the great powers at this time are the ones who are unified. So Sweden, the Poland-Lithuanian Commonwealth, these are some of the most powerful countries in Europe at this time because they are much more unified than some of the fractured places like Italy and Germany and France.
Denmark. These, however, all controlled more land than they do today. Norway had Iceland, Sweden had Finland, and Denmark had Scania in southern Sweden. Oh, not to mention they were all temporarily united under the Kalmar Union. And in fact, we have quite a few countries of today that already existed back then in another form, but holding more territory. Hungary was much larger than it is now, holding Slovakia, parts of Romania, and Serbia. In fact, Belgrade itself seems to be under Hungarian rule at this time. Oddly enough, despite losing sovereignty for various times, they only definitively lost this land in the 20th century with World War I. Lithuania too, it held much of Poland, Russia, Belarus, and Ukraine. This Grand Duchy of Lithuania occupied
Look how big Lithuania is at that time, and how much further to the east of where modern Lithuania is, most of their land is at that time.
Tremendous amount of land. Moldova was also slightly bigger than it is today.
Hey, I have an answer to part of the problem we're dealing with right now with Russia and Ukraine. Let's just make Crimea independent again. Just let them have their own country instead of fighting over it.
And of course, the Ottoman Empire was quite big, although not shown here at its peak territorial reach. Turkey today doesn't stretch into the Balkans in the same way that they did. The examples of countries that either didn't exist yet due to their territory being fragmented are much more. Let's go through some of them and focus on specific regions that were sovereign at the time.
So let's talk for a second about why. So you take a look right here. Obviously you see Austria is very small, and Austria of course is going to develop into think about how much of this fractured area is what's going to define European history a few centuries later, with the unification of Germany, the unification of Italy, France being much more solidified and arguably being the strongest land power a few centuries after this, Spain being as powerful as they are, the Austro-Hungarians developing. But right here is where you have the border between Muslim Europe and Christian Europe. And so that's why so much of the fighting in the 14, 15, 1600s is going to be focused around Wallachia and Hungary and Serbia. These are the places that are on the frontier, on the front lines.
But aren't anymore. Ireland was absolutely a mess, a mosaic of independent counties and duchies with a small English foothold. Munster, Ormond, Brittany, and Ulster are some among many that were at the time independent. I believe these small sovereign states progressively disappeared with English conquest.
I was going to say, it's not about Ireland uniting with itself. It's about England saying, it's all ours now, and then uniting it for them.
Then regaining their independence as a united Ireland in modern times. All the way to the east, Russia was not yet united either, and many were the principalities, republics, and duchies that were independent, although many of them having just broken free from being vassals of the Mongol Golden Horde. The Republic of Novgorod is one of them, the easternmost trading post of the Hanseatic League, with its people being very much influenced by the culture of the Byzantines.
And Russia not united yet either, and they're going to certainly develop into a major world power in the coming centuries.
Despite the population being Slavic, they were eventually destroyed through conquest by the Grand Duchy of Moscow, another sovereign state at the time, who would come to evolve into the Tsardom and Empire of Russia. It's therefore interesting to see how some of these medieval countries disappeared so that our modern ones could be created, both through the example of Novgorod, conquered by Muscovy and allowing it to grow into Russia, but also in Muscovy itself, that through conquest became a new, larger country.
So it's interesting as an American looking at this, obviously as an American, we don't realize just how new our country is. But I guess in a sense you can look at the maps and say, you know what, the fact that white Europeans are living here is fairly new compared to how long Europeans had been living in Europe. But as a country, going back to 1776, having a country, it makes us older than Germany, older than Italy, older than some of these other countries that didn't even exist yet. Poland obviously has a much deeper history, and so does Sweden and Norway and France and England and places like that. But some of these countries are relatively new.
Similar example is the Teutonic Order, which eventually formed into Prussia and paved the way for the creation of the modern German state. While a similar situation to Novgorod is found throughout Italy, where the various Italian sovereign states, such as Venice, Milan, Savoy, Genoa, the Papal States, and above all Naples and Sicily, were eventually destroyed so that they could unite into Italy. Although it wasn't a linear process, they didn't exist all the way to the point of Italian unification. Other things happened in between, but still. The Republic of Venice was one of Italy's many mercantile seafaring republics that traded and established outposts along the Mediterranean coast. In its early years, it prospered on the trade of salt, then expanding to dominate much of the sea trade of the Mediterranean, such a great sea power that their navy was even used in the Crusades, having one of the coolest flags ever. The opening of new trade routes to the Americas and the East Indies via the Atlantic Ocean marked the beginning of their decline as a powerful maritime republic, then losing their sovereignty due to Ottoman attacks.
It's all about trade and war,
as well as French and Austrian invasions. Genoa is another example of a maritime republic of Italy, at the time also controlling...
And the same flag as England.
Genoa, and surprisingly the southern coast of Crimea, so far away from their homeland, which was another sovereign country at the time, occupying not only much of the peninsula's actual territory, but also stretching into southern and eastern Ukraine.
I mean, look at that. Why would Genoa, a place over in Italy, control this? It's trade. It's all about trade.
The Crimean Khanate used this interesting-looking blue flag and was a Tatar state. It existed from 1441 to 1783, the longest living of the Turkic Khanates that succeeded the Empire of the Golden Horde. In 1783, the Russian Empire annexed them, violating a 1774 treaty which had guaranteed non-interference of both Russia and the Ottomans in the affairs of Crimea. Its impressive existence...
Wait, you're telling me that Russia had issues with guaranteeing the sovereignty of Crimea? There's nothing new under the sun. It's all connected.
And sovereignty or semi-sovereignty over 300 years makes it a big example on this list of countries of medieval Europe that don't exist anymore.
Some of these countries lasted significantly longer than the age of modern countries. Crimea was a country longer than Germany's been a country, or the United States has been a country.
Milan and Florence were important sovereign states as well, not to mention the vast rule that the Papal States still had over central Italy before eventually becoming reduced to what the Vatican is today.
Yeah, and people forget that the Pope had sovereignty over, I think, over a little bit of territory still up until the 20th century.
The Kingdom of Naples was previously known as the Kingdom of Sicily, then losing Sicily proper to Aragon, and thus renaming itself after their capital city. It eventually became under the control of the Spanish ruling dynasty. The Duchy of Savoy was also relevant, at the time taking up territory of modern Italy, but also France and Switzerland. Their sovereignty existed, but they were, at least at times, subjects of the Holy Roman Empire. Which brings us precisely to the HRE, which wasn't a country in itself, I would argue more of a confederation.
Yeah.
And it's the biggest chaotic mess on this map, with a lot of small
And so imagine then when you get to the 1500s and you get the Protestant Reformation, which of course takes place in all this mess. It happens in Württemberg, which is over in this area here. And you start having all of these smaller states, some of which become Protestant, some of which remain Catholic. And that's why you get the bloody mess of things like the 30 Years' War. Because suddenly, depending on what the ruler decides and depending on what the people decide, you have shifting alliances all right next to each other.
Sovereign duchies, bishoprics, republics, counties, and kingdoms. Here's a couple that stood out to me. Luxembourg, which at the time was bigger than it is today, and Bohemia and Moravia, today joined together in the Czech Republic,
yeah.
which were at the time two separate sovereign states, although I think the Bohemian crown also ruled Moravia, at least at one point. Numerous kings of Bohemia were also elected Holy Roman Emperors, and the capital of Prague was the imperial seat at various times.
And that's why you have such a massive castle in Prague. People don't talk as much about Prague, or Praha, as they say in their language, today, but incredible history there. And we're leading a tour there next year. I'm excited about that.
After the dissolution of the Holy Roman Empire in 1806, the territory became part of the Habsburg Austrian Empire and subsequently the Austro-Hungarian Empire from 1867, progressively losing its sovereignty as their own country, either joining the Habsburg Empire around Austria-Hungary or becoming a part of a larger German kingdom such as Bavaria or Prussia. These small sovereign German states eventually disappeared, later being further united into Germany itself.
So if you look at American records, so if you start doing your family history and you start looking into, a census record, you might see that the person doesn't say they were born in Germany. They say they were born in Saxony, or they were born in Württemberg. Or they won't say that they're born in a place like Poland. They might say they were born in Galicia. Or they might say they were born in Silesia or Bohemia or Moravia. Or you could have a person in 1900 who's born in Hungary who says they were born in Austria, because Hungary was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and a lot of times people just referred to all of it as Austria. Even though they weren't Austrian, they didn't speak German, they were Magyars, they were from Hungary. So those identities to the smaller or the former regions there, rather than what they became, are still there.
And while there are countless other examples of sovereign states that existed in medieval Europe that no longer do today, so many of which present on this map, that's how far we'll go in this video. There's even more examples if we expand this into Northern Africa or the Middle East, namely with Karaman, Mamluk Egypt, or Tlemcen, but that's for another time. And here we were still able to learn about some countries that existed in medieval Europe that don't anymore. So
I think I'm going to go to that link and maybe check out that map, because that's a cool one that I think I would like to add to my collection. So let me know your thoughts about all of that. What did he leave out? What should he have highlighted that maybe he didn't have a chance to talk about? What do you think? What do you know about some of these regions that maybe you can add to the conversation so we can learn together? Use the comment section below. Thanks for watching.